Welcome to another episode of the Dentology Podcast, where we discuss the business of dentistry. In this podcast series, we'll be discussing all the non-clinical aspects of dentistry, from goodwill values, finance, marketing, how to buy and sell a dental practice, mindset, through to where you can invest your money in team management issues. My name is Andy Acton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Strevens. Let's jump straight into it. So welcome to our latest episode of Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. And today we are incredibly fortunate to have Sarah Buxton joining us. And Sarah's a director at FTA Law. She's the dental guru on all things employment and HR, and a fitness fanatic. So how are you, Sarah? Good morning.
Hi, Sarah.
I'm great. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the nice introduction.
No, not at all. No, thank you for joining us. I know that it's been a busy morning for you already.
Dental guru. That's not a title to live up to, is it, Flip? But hey, you've definitely acquired it, I tell you, for the HR law especially.
Yeah, it makes a bit of a change from furlough queen.
See, I'd go dental guru.
I think dental guru wins hands down, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah. But in fairness, you are the furlough queen as well. I'm sure we'll get onto that in our chat as we go. So you obviously, qualified solicitor. You've been a solicitor for a number of years, but rolling back to the very beginning, did you always want to be a solicitor? How did you end up kind of choosing to get into the law?
It was always on my agenda from being quite young that I wanted to be a solicitor. I wasn't particularly good at the sciences, and I certainly didn't like the sight of blood. So the medical route or being a dentist just wasn't for me. And I love reading. I always loved my books. I loved English. So it seemed quite... it seemed like the route to go down. So from quite a young age, I had an interest in it. Did lots of work experience in law firms to see what it was like before I actually committed.
Was that easier back then,
to
Sarah?
doing a law
because
degree?
Now I think quite often people find it hard to get that kind of first level experience. Was it quite easy to get work experience back then?
No, I don't think it's changed. I think it's always been quite difficult to get into the legal industry. I think I was incredibly lucky that a law firm in Leeds city centre gave me an opportunity to go and shadow a solicitor for 2 weeks. But it's not easy, and it's still not easy. So I do feel quite sorry for the people that are coming through nowadays. Because
how old would you have been then, Sarah?
It's still quite difficult.
How old would you have been?
I was 16 when
Wow.
When I did shadowing, I was 16. Yes.
Yeah.
That's quite unusual in many ways, isn't it? Because lots of people, they don't know that early what it is they want to do. For somebody of your age to have already worked out that, you like English, you like words, the law might be something for you. You get lots of people who, even in their early mid-20s, still just don't really know what it is that drives them, what they're interested in.
Must have been quite intimidating almost.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I was intimidated to go and do the shadowing. I really enjoyed it, and the solicitor who I shadowed did look after me and helped me, and I'll always be grateful to them, because I think if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't have carried it on. But it's difficult, because I think when I was looking at doing A-levels and what I wanted to do at university, because law is a vocational degree, I had to be sure that it was what I wanted to do before I committed to it, because you can change if you want to go into the law if you do a general degree, but it's much harder and takes much longer to do that. So I just wanted to be sure that I was going down the correct route, and hence why I set out to do some work experience at 16.
And out of interest, I credit a guy when I worked in the bank who changed my future, because he sort of said you could either continue being a complete bit of a waster, having a good time, or you could actually, focus.
So you didn't take the advice?
No, I didn't bother. I just thought, I'll have a laugh. I'll tell you, it'd be great. But do you keep in contact, or have you been in contact with that solicitor since then?
It's funny, actually. I didn't keep in contact on a regular basis, but a couple of years ago, I was stood in a sandwich shop on my lunch, queuing up, and I saw him, and I said, "Oh, excuse me." And just went into detail, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so glad to hear from you and that you're doing well and everything else." So the legal industry's quite small, I suppose, especially if you work in Leeds City Centre, because all the legal offices tend to be in the same area. So yeah, it was, yes, I did bump into them a few years ago.
Oh, well.
I guess there's some parallels in some ways with dentists as well, because they're both professional careers. You both have to make a decision on what path you're going down fairly early on. In dentistry, I guess it's more science-led. And then you have to commit to this 5 years of learning. So there's, whilst, you spend all your time kind of supporting the dental profession, professionally, there is kind of a parallel between the decisions you had to make quite early on and the path you went on, and what a young person who is thinking about being a dentist would have to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I still see those parallels today, in so much that the legal profession and the dental profession are very similar in the way that they're regulated, and that we have the similar issues in that lots of lawyers are trained to do the law and advise and so on, but may not be trained on the business side or the marketing side. And that's the same with dentists. Dentists are trained to be a good dentist, but don't always have the external training to help run a business. And it's exactly the same for lawyers. So the parallels continue. I still see them today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you kind of got qualified, and then you sort of, you employment and HR, which is your specialty. And I know that as a sector, we've done presentations together, and it always makes me laugh because you always refer to property, and you always say, you've got the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954, that hasn't changed for so many years, and employment changed yesterday, and it's going to change tomorrow. It always makes me giggle that how much employment and HR changes. But I guess with the best will in the world and with a crystal ball, you'd have never had any idea that the employment and HR issues coming down the line in the last couple of years were going to be so massive. So from a professional point of view, has the last couple of years been quite challenging? I mean, I just think of the one word furlough has got massive implications in itself. But for you as an employment and HR specialist, what's the last couple of years been like for you? I guess it's been relentless.
Yes, I think that's a good word to use, relentless. I think, employment law has always been fast moving, and it changes because of the common law system that we have in place. So when there's a new case that goes through the court system, that can change our interpretations of the statutes. It's also fairly new law compared to property, which was, like you rightly said, some of those statutes were drafted in the 50s. As employment's fairly new, a lot of it came from the EU, and the discrimination legislation, for example, you're looking at it was 2010 when it was all accumulated together, so it's still fairly new. But I think what's happened over the last 2 years is, although as an employment lawyer we've been used to fast-moving legislation and changing our advice and keeping on top of it, what made it more difficult is the fact that the legislation or the changes that the government were bringing out wasn't well thought out. So when legislation, it takes years to think about and to write and to consult on it, they were making quite snap decisions. They would always announce those decisions at 5:00 on a Friday evening, when everybody's shutting down for the weekend, to come into play on Monday morning. And there was never any full answers to a lot of the questions that people had. So often we could give our opinion on how we would interpret that legislation, but it was unprecedented and we didn't know because nothing had gone through the court system to give us the answers. And a lot of it still hasn't gone through the court system to give us the answers. So we were doing our best to interpret that legislation, but I just feel as though a lot of it was very ill thought out, and that made it hard to try and then advise clients.
And I guess because it was such a fast-moving period.
And to do it on the hoof,
it was, wasn't it? And yeah, it's just an observation as opposed to defending anybody. I just don't think there was time to kind of think it through properly. I think it literally was just one day they came up with something and said, well, we'll do it this way.
I remember listening to some guy, I can't remember, he was either a QC or something when furlough had just been introduced. And he sort of said, there's no real relevance in the word. And he said we could call it chocolate bunny or something. He said, but this whole word then has now taken on this whole meaning of its own. He said, but it was a whole brand new thing that they started.
Yeah.
I mean, so just one thing, Sarah, what made you choose to go into HR as opposed to all the other parts of law that you could go into? Was there something that sort of drove you to say, no, I want to be HR law?
Well, I suppose, well, when I qualified at the time, we were on the cusp of a recession. So some areas were just not going to be available. They didn't, law firms don't take on property lawyers or corporate lawyers, for example, because when there's a recession, usually that type of work decreases. So, but with employment's quite, the employment lawyers are needed in a recession because people look at maybe redundancies or what required. So in my training contract, I'd done employment, I enjoyed it, and there was an opportunity to be an employment solicitor. So I took that opportunity. So I suppose it chose me rather than I chose it, but I'm glad I do enjoy what I do. So with it.
And you're very good at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
But also, I think credit to you as well. You know, we were just talking about kind of, you know, furlough and that. But to do what you did, which was to kind of put yourself forward and, you know, sit on webinar after webinar and sharing your insights is a brave thing to do, because there was a real lack of depth to what was being talked about. It was all brand new stuff. And you know, you were having to give your opinions and thoughts on where you thought it was going, without having the time to sit and, you know, read and digest and look at case law, because there wasn't any. And that's kind of a very solicitory thing to do. So to put yourself forward and kind of share insights and be there to support the profession, quite rightly, you've got the profile and the rewards for that. I don't think a lot of people would have had the confidence to have done that.
It's a confidence thing, I think, in the fact of being able to step out, because as you said, you didn't really have any historical case law to rely upon, and you were thinking on the hoof as much as anybody else, but doing it in a logical way.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I suppose it was special because it was during the pandemic and it was more strenuous, and like we've already said, there wasn't the ability to rely on case law. But what we do every day as solicitors is interpret legislation and give our opinion on it. So I didn't feel too much outside of my comfort zone doing it. And also I did want to help. I think it was incredibly difficult for the practice owner, the practice manager, and the entire team. And I knew that I had a skill where I would be able to help people try and get through the pandemic. And that was really important, to be able to give back to the profession at a time when they really needed some assistance.
Well, you were everywhere. Have you ever added up how many webinars you've done?
I've probably done more webinars than I've slept in the last 2 years.
I remember that. Do you remember that there was one, we did a webinar. I think it was just a meeting online. I can't remember about something. I think it was probably just seeing what everyone was doing. And I think we were like one of 4 or 5 that you'd had slotted in. And I think, you know, a lot of them are in the evening, aren't they? You know, 7 o'clock or whatever. And I think it's a huge drain on your time, you must have been webinared out. So it'd be fascinating to know how many you did. Have you done 500 or 1,000? So because you always seem to be doing webinars, because you'd pop up saying, "Oh, Sarah's having a webinar with Chris Barrow or Practice Plan or Adam." You were there. You were the font of all wisdom.
I recall on one occasion, I did webinar out, if that's the correct terminology, because one Thursday I started at 9 o'clock and I had one on the hour every hour and didn't stop until 9 o'clock in the evening. At 9 o'clock I could hardly speak. My voice had just completely gone because it's so used to speaking.
I think what's great though, it was coming from a place of but it's what you were saying about wanting to support the profession. You had a skill, knowledge and information that was arguably one of the most critical things that were needed at that time. I think in the very early days, I think lots of people were concerned about finance and banking and money. And because the banking sector supported the profession so well, most people got that sorted quite quickly. And then I think after that, it became an employment and HR issue about, do you furlough people? If you do, what does that look like? Who should be coming in? If people aren't well, how do you manage that? It was just endless. I think that employment and HR was a huge issue for businesses generally, but for the dental profession in terms of how to manage that.
Well, it was more complicated for the dental industry because of the NHS. So for other industries, it was straightforward. Do you furlough or not? Providing the right documentation to support that. But with the dental industry, with the mixed practices, with NHS and private, it was really complicated about whether you furlough or not, or whether you take the money from the NHS, and making sure that you satisfy the conditions. So there was an added layer that made it more difficult for the dentists. And I think it's an interesting one because FTA Law taking part in the public inquiry. So there's a public inquiry going on in respect of COVID-19. They are saying that it may last for 4 years. We probably think that's a minimum because there are many industries that will have questions as to what happened over the pandemic. And what we want to do is represent the all members of the dental team at that inquiry to try and get some of the answers to the questions we have. And why was it so complicated with the NHS private practices? Why did they need to know that information? And so on. And hopefully we'll be able to make sure that we learn from the mistakes that happened over the pandemic, and we'll be able to have some influence on public policy going forward. So that's quite exciting from my perspective to be involved in that. And hopefully it will finalise or bring to an end some of the questions that we couldn't answer over the last 2 years.
Is that is it COVID-19 Alliance or something? Is that the thing that I've
correct.
seen on the social media?
And is there do you need input from the dental profession on this? How do they find out about it?
Absolutely. So at the moment, we've set up a steering committee, which has some representatives on from the industry. So there are people representing hygienists and therapists, dental nurses, practice managers, and so on. And we've done that because we want to have a broad spectrum of information and opinions from people in the industry. Now, the stage that we're at the moment is that we have to apply to have a seat at the inquiry. We're working in conjunction with a QC, a barrister to make that application. And once we've got a seat at the table, so to speak, at that point we will be asking the industry for their opinions, and asking them for any queries or questions that they want raising. But obviously that's going to be structured how we do that. So if anybody's interested,
it is exciting,
you can sign
isn't
up
it?
on the website. It's really interesting. And if people sign up on the website, we'll keep getting updates about the public inquiry.
What is the website, Sarah? So as people listening, watching? COVID-19 Alliance something. Go to FTA Law. I'm sure there'll be a link there.
We'll put it in the put it in the notes on the episode. We'll drop it in the notes so that people can pick it up from there if they want to. But it does. It sounds like a really exciting initiative, and like you say, it's about learning what went on, what didn't go well. So hopefully we can put things in place so that going forward, heaven forbid something like this come around again, we don't kind of hit the reset button and just start again. We learn from what's gone on already.
I suppose the exciting bit also might be if you can get a seat at the table, then for future discussions about other stuff, you'll be invited to input and maybe comment upon. And I think that would be fabulous, wouldn't it? You know, makes it very, very interesting, very exciting.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be, I mean, from a personal opinion, it's a career highlight to be involved in something like this, because it doesn't come across your desk very often, a public inquiry. But also, I think it's the icing on the cake for basically trying to finish off what we've been supporting the profession with over the last 2 years, because people will still ask, why do the NHS need to know certain information? And I can't give them those answers, but hopefully that's the kind of thing we can ask at the inquiry to try and get to the bottom of. So hopefully it will finalise or finish a lot of the give answers to a lot of the questions that are still left open and unanswered.
That sounds like a really interesting piece of work. No, I wish you all the best of that. We'll keep an eye on how that develops. So through the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about work-life balance. And I think particularly in the first lockdown, going back to kind of March 20 through to June, a lot of people kind of reassessed what they wanted to do, how much they wanted to work.
And the 1.5 million people who've disappeared from the workforce. They've obviously reassessing their work-life balance somewhere.
and there does seem to be a kind of a change in outlook. And I know that dentistry as a profession does offer great flexibility. You know, there's lots of people that work in the dental profession that work on a flexible or part-time basis. This whole work-life balance, is it something that it was just talk at that time, or has it impacted at your end in terms of talking to your clients about how to restructure employment packages with their teams? Is it a real thing? Are people looking to rejig what their packages look like now?
Yes, very much so. I think, I still get asked on a regular basis, what should I pay my staff? What's the going rate? What shall I pay my associates? It's more than what the remuneration package is. People look at new jobs and new places, or even retention, like staying where they are because of what else is offered. And I refer to them as fringe benefits. It's like, what else can you bring that isn't just throwing money at people? Because that's not what it's all about. When people do surveys, they will look at other salary never comes out top on why people remain with their team or remain employed at the place where they're at. Obviously, it's part of it, and if they're underpaid, that's not great. But we need to look at what else we can provide. So, well-being is very much at the top of a lot of people's agendas at the moment, and you can look at providing benefits such as gym membership, personal training sessions, private health, even something such as knowing that you have a mental health first aider within the team can really bring a lot of comfort to a team member and make them feel as though they're very much well looked after. It may be, I mean, you touched, Andy, there on flexibility. That could be also something that as an employer you may want to offer in terms of providing more annual leave or unpaid leave. So there's lots of other options that you can provide as an employer to the team members. I think people look at corporate social responsibility. What do you do as a charity? What do you do charitable? What do you do for charity? What do you do socially? And so it's not all about the remuneration package. I've been asked lately quite a lot to draft things such as bonus retention schemes. So if you stay with me for 12 months, I'll then pay you a lump sum at the end of the 12-month period. But my advice to clients really are they'll leave after the end of the 12 months once they've taken that amount, because you're buying loyalty rather than earning loyalty. So, the risk is that they'll go at the end of it, because you've got to look at what else you can provide as an employer to the employees. That's not monetary.
These broader package benefits that you've talked about, they've kind of effectively been around forever. They're not new. They're things that people could have done 2, 3, 5 years ago. But has there been a serious spike post-COVID where people are now focusing very much more on some of the non-financial aspects of a package?
Yes, very much so. I mean, during the pandemic, the Good Work Plan came into force, and that said that was a change in legislation that stated that you have to list all your benefits within your employment contract. Before that, you could get away with providing benefits without it being set out in your contract. So things that we often miss, or in the as managers who are drafting these contracts, are things like not putting in Christmas bonuses or free dental treatments, a big one, and that's a benefit to the team that they don't set out in the contract. So to all our clients, we always ask, what are your benefits? What are you providing? And it's at the front of their mind, because we have to now draft contracts in that way. But I think also what has happened is during the pandemic, well-being has been something that people have focused on more due to media quite often. It seems to be something where we hear a lot more about it. There's a lot more cases in the employment tribunal about mental health, because mental health can come within the definition of a disability, and therefore is protected characteristic, and therefore you can have a discrimination claim made against you if you don't deal with it in the right way. So because of the influx in cases and the media, that turns people's attention to it more. A lot of the team members are burned out. There's a lot of stress and anxiety, and they're not scared to raise this within the workplace. So what do we do about well-being? What do we do? And that's why that has become a bigger issue.
And dealing with people, I suppose. And I think that's this isn't a plug for you, but it sort of is. But that's why you need to have a Sarah in your team, don't you, really? Because it is so complex that, you've not just about the legal bits, but also how do you deal with someone who raises an issue in your practice about, a well-being issue, that there's the possibility, isn't there, that the principal dentist is like, pull yourself together. Don't be stupid. Just get over it. But that then turns into something else. And that's where you need to have Sarah, who sort of is there and saying, well, hang on a minute, before you open your mouth, just think about what you're going to say. Because I think that's one of the things that whenever we've listened to you, because obviously we've done lots of seminars with you and some of the webinars, is that this thing about people having to consider what they respond rather than just respond in how they feel they would like to respond, because it's not necessarily in their best interest.
I suppose respond rather than react.
Respond rather than react. Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you for that. I think, yes, I don't think it's always recognised within the team when there's an issue that needs to be dealt with. And that's where me and my team come in, because we can recognise where there are issues and what needs to be done from a legal standpoint. I think a lot of practice owners and managers are having to deal with stress, anxiety and burnout as well. And what we can do is help and support them. So, for example, I have lots of clients who really struggle on the HR and employment side. And what we do is we give them confidence and comfort to know that they're doing the right thing, because we've already spoken about how fast moving it's been, how it's changed. And it's my full-time job to keep up to date with the changes and know what's going on. And as a manager or an employer, it's a very small element of what you've got to do during your day. So what we can do is we can take away that stress. So not only do we help the team members who claim that they have well-being, mental health issues, and help them, support them and tell the employer what to do, but what we also do is help the employer with their stresses. So it's very much twofold as how we help our clients.
You must at times act like almost a confidant, a partner, because one of the things we always say is that we're very lucky that there's two of us, whereas a sole practitioner, who do they turn to if only just to sort of like try and get some sense into something? So you must end up with almost sort of agony aunt is not quite the right phrasing, but you must become another, almost like a silent partner sometimes in their businesses, really.
Well, absolutely, because it's much bigger than just the employment and HR. I mean, I do like to go and see clients as much as I can, and go and see their dental practices and spot of lunch or coffee with them. But if I can, and we're on Zoom most of the time or on over the phone, I can take, it could be a good hour. And it's not just about the HR and employment elements. It's about the business and the other elements and the leadership challenges, I suppose, that they're facing. And we try and help as much as possible with those. Because I think what we have is the experience, because we have over 150 clients on a HR and employment service. We get to know what all those different clients are doing what they're feeling. And it's not that we breach confidentiality at all, but it's just that we get a good feel for what's going on in the profession, so that we can speak about, you're not the only one that this is happening to. This is happening, and that's a lot of comfort to people, because, like you say, it can be lonely being a practice owner.
Oh, yeah, I think knowing somebody else is in that situation is hugely comforting. Just out of interest, Sarah, do you spend more of your time getting your clients out of problems or more of your time putting in place strategies to prevent those problems occurring in the first place?
Most of our time is spent with the prevention element of it. So the strategies, the policies, the procedures, the contracts, and holding their hand through a difficult HR situation to prevent from it escalating into a dispute. Because the last thing I really want for my clients is to end up in the employment tribunal, because it's time consuming, it's costly, and it's incredibly stressful. So our jobs as being the preventers of that happening as much as we can. We can't always, but the majority of the time I feel as though we put our clients in the best position possible to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, which makes, which
I always see you as a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that was your answer, because that's a good way of delivering a service. And also, I think dentists on the whole, they're good people who try to do the right thing. And logically, it would make sense to put in place a good infrastructure, which then will minimise the risk of problems coming, as opposed to just being reckless and then dealing with them as they come up. Your own profile, Sarah, over lockdown in particular, you're now officially the Employment and HR Queen of Dentistry. It's an official thing. It's a real badge of honour that's out there. So
we doff our caps.
We're in the presence of royalty.
Yeah. It's the Queen.
But social media and building a profile.
See me going red, will they?
It's all right. We can edit it back to normal colour. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
But social media and building a profile in dentistry is a big thing. You know, there's lots of people who I know, lots of dentists who've built a business on the back of Instagram. Your profile exploded. So I think for me, there's two things in there. One, was there kind of a plan beyond just providing insights and support to the profession? And two, how did you feel about that? Because when you start getting exposure and profile, when you go to events, people start recognising you. So you've gone from being somebody who's done your work for the last 10 years to somebody who people start recognising, going, I know that's Sarah Buxton over there. How did those things feel?
Well, to deal with the first question, there wasn't really a plan in place. I think I was invited by, and I think it's appropriate to acknowledge Chris Barrow, who invited me to do some Facebook Lives initially when the pandemic started. And every Monday I would sit with Chris on Facebook and we would get questions thrown at us. And at one point, I think we had about 5,000 people join us on Facebook Live. And then, of course, we've already touched on the amount of webinars. And it wasn't that there was such a plan. I just felt as though this is what I had to do to help. And then from that, obviously people became very socially savvy. So there was lots going on in Facebook groups and on Instagram. And again, it was appropriate because I felt as though I could help on some of those groups on Facebook, because I remember reading things like things about holiday entitlement, and then somebody had copy and paste some legislation from Australia and say, this is what you need to do. And I'm like, no. Take advice because that's not quite right, or that's what we used to do in the 80s, but we don't do that anymore. So just take advice before you go any further. So again, I think people were looking for answers, and so it felt appropriate to have a Facebook profile, an Instagram profile. So we set those up, and it was a way of getting information out there. It's all about updating people, which we do, which I do via the social media channels. To deal with the second point about the profile being raised and being recognised, it is quite strange in so much that obviously they clients and have seen you, and some people see you every other Thursday on a business confidence forum, and you may have spoken to them or answered their question, and they see that as being very personal, but you can't see them. They're just a name. So it's quite often I will be at a trade show or out and about, and people do come and approach me, and usually they're saying thank you, and it's very nice to think that you've helped them. I have had one situation where I was on the phone to a practice manager, and she got very excited and started screaming down the phone, "Oh my gosh, it's Sarah Buxton!" and went and got the practice owner just to come on to say hello to me. They were like, "We can't believe Sarah Buxton has phoned us." And that was a bit like, "Oh, okay."
Celebrity Buxton.
Yeah,
but also that's the impact you've had, isn't it? That and you're right. You're pushing out so much content information. There will be other people out there that will have really benefited from it, which is a lovely thing to hear. Okay, yeah, it makes you feel a little bit odd, but it's a lovely bit of feedback too.
Yeah, it's nice, and I have no issues with it. I actually think it's quite nice, especially if you're approached, because quite often I will remember their situation or their question, because everybody's unique and got their own issue. So I can actually relate to them, and it's always nice to put a face to a name, because I literally see names, and like you say, I will see the same names over and over again on a lot of webinars and forums. So it's lovely. I've got no problem with people approaching me.
The next step, Sarah, is you've got to sort out your autograph. Because obviously that'll be your next step. Could you autograph my T-shirt? Has to be a very simple one, very quickly done. Yeah, could you autograph my employment contract?
on a business side of things, Sarah, are there any big employment or HR issues coming down the line that business owners need to be aware of? Because I feel now we're kind of coming to the end of the whole kind of pandemic, COVID. It feels like we are in kind of going back to business as usual. But aside from that, are there any things that business owners need to be aware of that are coming at us over the next year or so?
Yeah, well, I think for dentists, they need to be aware of the issue. It's something that I've always advised on, but I think we're aware that there's been some changes in respect of self-employed worker and employee status. And that is still something that I think people need to draw their attention to. I still come across practices that don't have any agreements in place, or are treating their associates like employees and trying to make them self-employed. And I think that is something that we do need to look at, because there has been some changes in respect of tax. There was the Uber taxi case, and also vicarious liability. So whether you're responsible for the clinical treatment of your self-employed team members. So there's been a lot of changes there, and I think that will continue. So I think that's something that as a manager or employer, we need to be aware of. And there are the general employment updates. Every April, there's an increase in the amount of statutory payments that have to be made. So statutory sick, maternity, paternity, adoption, all that will increase in April of this year. And also there's going to be a focus on things such as, I think, huge focus on mental well-being. And I think that includes, I've seen quite a lot in the legal news about menopause and what that means in the workplace, and whether that should be something that's protected, and how we deal with menopause in the workplace. So I think that's something that we may need to be looking at going forward. But also there's still the things such as we haven't really touched on what's going to happen with some of the legislation post-Brexit, because post-Brexit they said they may look at working time regulations, and since Brexit they've been incredibly busy with the pandemic, so they've not really looked at any legislation that they said they would look at. So I think there are a lot more changes to come, and I think back end of this year I think we'll see a lot. So we'll be back where we started, won't we? Trying to catch up with it all and what's
busy times.
Well, I was going to say, I think that just reinforces everything that we've been saying, which is it's a really fast-moving, ever-changing part of the law. I mean, you just rattled off 5 or 6 different things there that, and then you get brand new things like dealing with the menopause.
But it's so costly if you get it wrong. I think that's the thing people don't look at, is they need to look at the fact of it's not so much the cost of getting it right, but you should get it right anyway. But it's the cost of getting it wrong. I know when you tell Sarah about some of those tribunal awards for things that seem relatively minor, and I don't mean that rudely, but you end up some guy paying thousands, tens of thousands of pounds, when really they could have sorted it out if they'd have actually given it the attention it deserved at the beginning, rather than hoping they'd get away with it or whatever. I don't know, it's fascinating.
Yeah, quite often, and I think it's important to know that when a dispute happens, quite often it can be resolved by either rectifying what you've done. So if the procedure has been incorrect, we can rectify it and do the correct thing, or by an apology if you do something wrong. And people miss that. And a lot of my advice is, have you had a conversation? Have you done go back and let's speak to them? And it may be a difficult conversation, but let's start there, because actually we can resolve a lot of issues by good communication. And I think, again, we're coming back to the point that this is where we can help the team members all work together in that way and make sure that it's working right. Even if you have messed up, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up in the employment tribunal. And what we can do is help with that.
Yeah, cool. Sarah, it's been a great chat. I've really enjoyed it. It's been fascinating. Like I say, I think to hear what your last couple of years has been like, because this has been eye-opening in terms of, the hours that you put in and trying to share. So I imagine it's probably easing up a bit for you. It's not quite a quiet time for you, but it's probably getting slightly easier than it has been for the last couple of years. We always finish up asking our guests the same two questions just to get a little insight from them. If you could be a fly on the wall with somebody in a certain situation, what situation would you like to look in on and observe on?
I think with this one, I think I'd like to have been a fly on the wall when the result of the referendum, the Brexit referendum, came in at number 10. I think it would have been really interesting to see the reaction of David Cameron at the time, because I don't think it was expected by anybody. No. And I just remember the following day going into the office, and it was kind of quiet, like people were shocked. And I think whatever you voted, it didn't really matter. I just felt as though there was like this, it was quite tense. So I can't imagine what it must have been like in number 10 when that result came in. So I think it would have been really interesting to see what the reactions were.
There was shock, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't think
like you say,
really
I think on both sides, no.
Not at all.
Yeah,
no, not at all, not at all. And then our last question, and our last question is: if you could meet somebody, who would you like to meet, given the opportunity?
Living or dead, fictional or fact? So whoever you fancy, really.
Do you know? I would really like to meet Baroness Karen Brady. I think she is a very strong woman. I think she represents a strong businesswoman. I think she's extremely she's just somebody who I think I look up to. I think she's a strong leader, and I think she's I've read her books. And they're all very good, and they're all very empowering for female business leaders. So I would definitely like to meet Karen Brady if I could. But I'd probably have to apply for The Apprentice or something.
Brilliant.
Me too.
Yeah. Is she still on The Apprentice? I don't watch The Apprentice anymore. Is she still on the panel?
Don't know. I watched
it. She is. Yeah.
I'll tell you what's fascinating, Ed. I don't know how many of these we've done. We've never had two people the same.
No.
It is brilliant. No guest has ever said, I wish I was the fly on the wall in so-and-so. Yeah. And I would like to meet so-and-so. It just shows the diversity of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Exactly. Well, Sarah, that was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. I know you're still incredibly busy, so we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for your time.
But it's really enjoyable. Really enjoyable.
Much.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Wow, Sarah Buxton's had a busy couple of years, hasn't she?
Oh, hugely. You know, that furlough launches to the world, and then suddenly they're having to answer questions on it left, right and centre. And I suppose also when you think the practices were shut, the principals had loads of time to think about stuff and worry. I think
the thing that's really impressive is, we know that lawyers like to know the details. They want the I's and the T's crossed before they kind of form an opinion or say something. Whereas Sarah was quite unusual in that she was prepared to put herself out, based on, legislation that came out on a Friday. She was prepared to talk about it that day or the next day. And kind of give her insights and share where she saw the direction going, which I know the profession took huge value from. They found it incredibly comforting that there was somebody with her specialist knowledge supporting them.
And I think she has great confidence in her to be able to do it. And it would be interesting how many webinars did she do. You know, that one when she was saying 9 till 9, I mean, that is a long day.
Yeah.
Isn't it? That's like, you know, if you think about a performer goes on and sings for 2 hours or something. You know, that's a long
And
day.
to her credit, she's put in the hard yards. And, you know, we joke about the queen of, you know, the employment HR queen of dentistry. But she is. She's carved that niche. That's her position.
She's done brilliantly.
And she's the go-to for it. Yeah, it was a really enjoyable conversation.
It was good. Really good.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank
you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.